the pressure that we put on ourselves, specifically as artists with fine arts and all of this. Okay, being worthy is so problematic.
The only way to get to that discovery is through the work. You show up, you do the work, you have an idea, you feel inspired. There's always more to learn, there's always more directions to grow into. There's always ways to develop. Every time I get out of bed, I have to decide, am I going to keep doing this work? Because it's hard and it's vulnerable. I came to painting looking for joy. And it also similarly surprised me in the way that it held space for the entire paradox of my experience.
Hey, you guys, welcome back to the Arts to Hearts podcast. If you're a regular listener, thank you so much for tuning back in again. I'm very excited to be back. And if you are listening this for the first time, we are a very cool gang who loves to talk about art and lots of deep conversations, a lot of honesty. And this is my favorite place to be in. So thank you so much for tuning in. And to really help us and support the show, make sure you subscribe, like, and share the content that we share. It truly helps us make this a better show and reach a wider audience, to make art more approachable, to have these conversations for all of us, and that no women artists in the world should ever feel alone. I think that's my mission. So, yes, if you like what we do, make sure you support us in whatever way by subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting, whatever works for you. Now, for today's recording and today's episode, I have Jess Currier. Jess is an amazing artist based out of Los Angeles. And oh my God, this is such a warm conversation. I really, really enjoyed speaking to Jess. And not only that, I actually felt like an instant connection with her. She had these deep, intense words to share with us. And um, it was just so wonderful to hear her perspective. And we actually, this episode, let me tell you why you should listen to this episode. This episode is for anyone who thinks, who needs to hear on how to shape their voice, how important it is to figure who you are as an artist. And we're not talking the traditional way, like, okay, but also like as a person, and how you need to build patience and resistance and being truly connected to your work. I think Jess had so much to speak about that. We had like a very, very honest conversation about all of these things, and I'm very excited to share this episode with you. So make sure you tune in and let's get into the episode. I saw your Instagram. Of course, we follow you. I remember one of your posts I was reading, and I was like, I have to ask Jess about this, which was like you had this reel where you, if was it a reel? I don't remember, but I remember reading this specifically. After 7 years of making art, you finally feel like you found your style. And I love your captions. I love your captions. I'm a person with, like, deep thoughts, and I love deep conversations and digging the surface. So let's talk about that, and let's start from here, because this is a typical topic. Someone who's like, 7 years, and after that now you're creating a work that you really feel connected to. And you just said that, it's been 7 years and you finally feel like you've arrived in the style that you wanted. Can you talk about that?
Oh, absolutely. I love that that's the one that stood out to you. And I love that question because I could talk about that all day long. It's also deeply connected to my journey as a painter and as an artist. Because I knew I wanted to do art. I knew I wanted to be an artist from when I was like a tiny child. But it took me a very long time to really begin to put the work in. And it's been about 7 years now since I really committed to painting as my primary creative expression. And before I started, I really believed that style or your creative voice um, was something that you had to choose and kind of impose on your work, right? That you had to come to your creative work not only with inherent talent that was just magically there, but with your voice already developed. Because that's the tip of the iceberg that you see when you're exposed to the work of artists in the world. When you're exposed to creative work, you're seeing that outcome way further down the line from these creators. And that's across all media you consume, right? So whether you're listening to a song or watching a movie, reading a book, looking at artwork, you are engaging with um, the creative product from someone who has really developed their voice over time.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of fall for this mythology
Yeah.
that to be an artist, you must be naturally good at it without
Yeah.
trying and without practice. And you must have a natural, unique voice that comes through immediately.
Yeah.
And both those things really prevented me from putting the work in for a long time.
What are the things that you feel that prevented you? Like, how would you interpret that?
I didn't want to be bad at it.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest fears we all have.
Oh,
Bad
absolutely.
art.
Yeah, and I because for me, I knew I wanted to paint. I knew I wanted to be a fine artist, quote unquote,
Yes.
whatever that
Yes.
means. um, I I really didn't like my ego could not handle being bad at it. I didn't
Yeah.
want to be bad at it, and I had this. I think most creative people, their
Yes.
taste outpaces your ability. Um, I think that's for your entire life. Spoilers. It never stops. But at the beginning, especially, there's a big gap there, right? Um, and because I really cared about painting and I really saw myself as an artist, and that's who I knew. That's what I
You
knew I
were.
wanted to do with my life. Um, what ended up happening for me was that I would dip my toe into it. I would try it here and there. Um, but never with enough dedicated effort, because as soon as
Yeah.
I created something that I wasn't happy with, I would get really
Gave
discouraged
out.
and I would give up.
Yeah.
And I ended up doing a lot of other creative work. So I did
Yeah.
photography, graphic design, interior design, and
Oh,
project
wow.
management,
Interior as well?
all these other things. Interiors, so like commercial interior branding. And I'm grateful for all those detours. I
Yeah.
learned a lot. I picked up a lot of skills, but they were all just a different version of me running away from painting because I was afraid of being bad at it.
Oh my
And it
God.
wasn't until I I got to the point I had been doing photography for a while. I was doing portraiture and weddings, and I decided to close down that business. And I started doing design work. And as the momentum picked up for that, I got to this point where I was like, oh, I recognize this place. This is exactly where I was with photography, where a couple years in, I'm like, okay, I'm gaining momentum. I'm starting to go down this career path, but I know that it's not what I want to be doing.
Oh my God. I can relate to every bit of it. You know what? I have been a fashion designer. I've done jewelry and worked with places who, at that point, I didn't come from jewelry background, but they were, I wanted to explore. I still didn't know where I was fitting in, and I thought, okay, I could do this, and then I didn't enjoy it, and then I thought, okay, branding and design, because I still am pretty good at it when it comes to branding, but I thought I had to be good at something naturally to be there. And
And I felt so unsatisfied but from all of that I was doing, but also so unsatisfied from my own self, because I was like, I don't know what I feel I want to do. I want to be creative, but I didn't know how. And when and I was still doing all creative jobs. None of the jobs that I've done so far in education, apart from history, which I feel like is still creative, but never taught creatively. But I felt like I don't know if something is wrong with me. Did you ever feel like there's something wrong with you because you are moving from one point to another? I felt that for a very long time.
Oh, I definitely felt that. I think especially because when I decided to leave photography, I felt like something was wrong with me because I was doing well in it. It was
Yeah.
something that I was naturally inclined towards. Um, and I looking back now, I think what had happened was I didn't care about it as much as I cared about painting. And so
Yeah.
I was okay being bad at it at the
Yeah.
beginning. And I put the work in to get better and became good at it. I became proficient in it. And I built a sustainable business doing it. And so many people who were starting out looked up to me and would tell me all the time how much they admired what I was doing and they wanted to learn from me. And so I felt like something was wrong with me because I felt guilty, like I wasn't appreciative of this dream that other people had for themselves that I was living. But I knew that it wasn't right for me. I knew that it wasn't the work that brought me alive. And
Okay.
and I had to get to the point where I I was okay leaving something that I had become good at to
Yeah.
do something that I would be bad at that I
But
really
really,
loved.
did you think even when you started painting or being a painter, were you bad at it? Because I think it's just, I think the imposter in us, or when we like, I think I honestly, this what you're sharing right now is bringing so many questions, and I'm looking at myself also, and like, really, what you're saying is something I also need to retrospect, because I'm just thinking sometimes, like, were you really bad at it, or it was just your ego because you truly wanted it? And I think of fear, when I think I just knew, I at least when I look back today, I think I just knew graphic or branding or all of those things that I was doing felt a lot more safer, because they were paying my bills, and that was a big thing for me, that I knew that I had something that was covering my back in terms of money. But also, for me at least, I think where I also have felt this pressure of being relevant. Like, I wanted to do something that I was appreciated and would be taken seriously, let's say. And when I did all of that, and I was like, you know what, I don't enjoy being taken that seriously, because at least, as long as I'm not taking myself seriously, because whatever I was doing, I was like, okay, yes, what I'm doing has value, but not value in the sense of what I want, So I truly want to ask you, were you bad at it? Because I doubt that you were bad at it, because I don't think any of us are bad at anything that we feel naturally called for. Yes,
Mm.
but our standards are so high that I don't. Do you think you're how good? Okay, let me ask this question. How good do you think are you today?
Oh, uh, I think today I can, I'll put it this way. When I started, the gap between what I envisioned in my
Yes,
mind, wanted to create, and what I was capable of producing,
of doing.
that gap was very big.
Yes,
Good or bad, I, I don't know.
yeah,
That's so
yeah,
relative. That's so subjective. But the
right,
gap
absolutely.
in what I pictured in my head and what I was capable and had the tools and the skills to create with my hands, that was a very big gap. Now, that gap is a lot smaller. And
Smaller.
so the process of creating the work is a lot less frustrating
Yeah.
than it was at the beginning. And I think that the reason I like to talk about that
Yeah.
online and I like to share that part of my story is that that frustration is what kept me from putting in the work to close the
Yes.
gap.
Yes.
And if you don't put in that work, you're never going to
I
make
love
that gap
that.
smaller. And I think it's really important, one, to normalize putting in the work, but also to normalize the gap because um, I still do have a bit of a gap, and I think I always will. I think
Will.
that's just part of being an artist.
Yes.
And
Yes.
if there was never a gap between your vision and your ability, the work would be so boring, right?
Yes.
That
Yes.
gap that keeps us exploring. And it's the when it comes to skill, and when it comes to style and voice, like circling back to that original question, um, I think of it through the metaphor of archaeology, and that's how I
Oh,
talk
wow.
about it all the time. Is I think of style as something that you are discovering, like an archaeologist doing a dig. So the more you do the work, the more you discover what is within you,
Yeah.
and you bring it to the world.
Yeah.
But you have to do the work to get there. And that's why
Yes.
I love creativity. That's why I love
Yeah.
art. But it's never going to get boring. There's always going to be that
Wow. Yeah.
that gap between your vision and
Yeah.
your ability that you work to make smaller, but the goalpost keeps moving in a good way. Um,
Yeah.
and there's always going to be that sort of mystery of where will this lead me? And what else will I discover? Because as you change and evolve as a human, that voice, like what you discover as you dig, is going to change and evolve. So there's always more to learn. There's always more directions to grow into. There's always ways to develop and add on to your skills. And so that's a very long way of answering the question of
No, absolutely not.
good now. I think um, I'm much more proficient at
Yes.
creating what I envision than I used
Yeah.
to be.
I like how you put that way. Because I think, yes, I think you've really put it in a very consolidated format because a lot of us feel discouraged. And I think it's also because I think it comes, I don't know. I'm just introspecting. Like you said, sometimes we feel like being creative is natural, or being good at something, something like that. And you wouldn't, let's say if you're a lawyer or if you're a doctor, nobody would put that pressure on themselves. Like, okay, you know what? I want to be a lawyer and doctor, and I have to be good on the day one. We all know that we all learn on the job. And once you set your mind to it, you put the work and you get better. But with creativity, I think, even though I truly believe that the moment we come on this planet, our practice of creativity starts when we are young. What we are looking at, how we are expressing, how we interact with things is how we are building our subconscious mind. And some of us choose to use that subconscious mind and that creativity, let's say, you know for our professions, for our passions, and for some, they want to keep them to themselves. But we also feel this pressure as artists, I think, that we have to say groundbreaking, make work that, I don't know, very, like, very, sometimes it sounds insane because I remember for a very long time, I felt the pressure when I was like still in India, yeah, that I had to make serious art or art that had something to say. And like decorative art was not enough. And like you said,
Mm.
all those questions were good to ask to push you deeper. But when you ask them and you feel them too early, it became a roadblock.
Um, I was just gonna say, you touched on something that is very near and dear to my heart. It's essentially what all of my work is about, and it's this idea of um, feeling like you need to save the world with your art. Essentially, like feeling like you need to. There needs to be some sort of deeper, ulterior purpose for
Yeah.
your creative work. That it has
Yeah.
to have some sort of function in service of society,
Yes.
in
And being
service of
decorative is not enough.
and being decorative. Oh, being decorative. That's almost like a
Yes.
bad word, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
where I really struggled with that too,
Oh,
especially
me too.
I was raised in a very like strict religious environment in the United States. And so that was also very instilled in me. I really
Yes.
felt like my work had to be part of this sort of mission to save the world. And that is a whole lot of pressure for your art, for
Oh my
one.
goodness.
It's a lot of
Absolutely.
pressure on people. But also, it assumes that beauty is not doing that.
Yes.
And
I love that.
and it really was when I started really dedicating myself to painting. I had to come to terms with that because the work that got me most excited, the work that really like just lit my soul on fire was like painting flowers.
Yes, I know that.
And and I had to come to terms with that and be like, "Ooh, okay, this is deeply meaningful to me." Like,
Yeah.
and I have become now fiercely protective
Yeah.
of the idea of beauty as being inherently valuable and good and worthy, and creative work, for the sake of creative work, being inherently worthwhile and good and valuable, whatever it is that you're doing. It doesn't even have to be aesthetically pleasing, but if you're just doing work because it's aesthetically beautiful, that is bringing value to the world. It's bringing value to your life. Like, you leaning into that is not only valid and worthwhile, but I have, I think that for me, embracing beauty in my work isn't actually an act of
Important.
brave rebellion.
Yes, I
It's an
love that.
act of
Love that.
brave rebellion against despair. And that goes into my own story and, um, ups and downs with mental health and depression and all, life is so
Yeah.
hard and so painful, and none of us avoid suffering. And
Yeah.
so within that, to hold space for encounters with beauty, to hold space for those moments of transcendence,
Yeah.
um, that is the pursuit of life.
And I think with the pandemic, I think how I have tried to comprehend this for myself in my own daily life. I remember, so like, with the pandemic, a lot of us like listen to music. And let's say I have had incredibly hard time in the past 2 years ever since I lost my mom. My life has been like a goodness. But
Can't imagine.
my moments of joy have been when I looked at something which probably wasn't like, it was just a piece of drawing I saw somewhere, or a music that was just fun, or and I started to think about this, like, how music works, like, if musicians started to think that, okay, I have to write something which is deeply profound always, and has to have a reason, has we would all be so depressed. We all would be so depressed, because we would all start to find problems and so, like, reasons, and just I think there's so much good music out there. I specifically rely on, because when I feel like I'm not feeling good, I know when I play something that's just casual fun, look at it, and brings me so much peace, and it really it soothes me, and that is a big therapy couldn't do that. Life couldn't do that. Nothing could do that, and just
Art
someone who
does.
created. Yeah. And just looking at something that's, I'm a person who finds a lot of joy in beauty, in the sense of something that just the colors, and just art in general. And sometimes I started to realize this, that when I was putting that pressure on myself of really doing something that had something to say, that was profound or something, I started to feel uncomfortable in my own practice, because specifically after my mom, that was a very confusing period, because I didn't know that what should I do. I had too many emotions in me, and one way I was grieving so much that it was of course becoming a part of my work, but on the other end it was becoming so heavy and hard, that I was thinking how. Then I started making really these little things that I enjoyed, like jewelry, and those were just beautiful pieces that I enjoy, even though they had a purpose that I understood later. But I just knew that I had to make something just that didn't feel so heavy at that point. It wasn't even for anybody else. I just wanted to make something that would make me feel a little more relieved, and I wouldn't have to be have this. So if and I have nothing, I mean, I and like I said in the beginning, like sometimes it's nice. These questions are incredible. I think we all should ask ourselves, because we all have, I think, no art, anything that we create doesn't, there's nothing that doesn't have a purpose. But the pressure that we put ourselves on to know the purpose before we do the work, I think I
Mm.
have started to work actually in the opposite direction. I feel like I'll do the work. If I'm doing this, there's a reason I am doing this. Otherwise, I wouldn't go through with it. I'm not a person, like you said, we've moved things. You quit photography, you did that. And if you are doing this, there is a purpose. And the purpose unfolds itself with the work in itself, and it evolves, and we change, and the purpose changes. And like, but the pressure that we put on ourselves, specifically as artists with fine arts and all of this, okay, being worthy is so problematic.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So good. This is where I come back to the metaphor of archaeology,
Yeah.
because in the same way of, that's how I see finding your voice, finding your style as an artist. I think it's the same thing with the meaning of the work. Like the only way to get to that discovery is through the work. And so you don't, I think that's a mistake that we all make kind of when we're coming into creative work um, early on, is that pressure that we put on ourselves, feeling like I have to know where this is going. I have to know the
Yeah.
purpose of it. It has to um, earn its right to exist. Somehow it has to be worthy of my time and my energy, and it has to serve this purpose, or I have to know where it's going. And I just think creativity doesn't work that way. There's so much
Yeah.
about it that is mysterious. It's more like a dance. Like
Yeah.
you show up, you do the work, you have an idea, you feel inspired. Um, but showing up to participate, like that's you doing your part, but then inspiration and creativity and your work dances with you, and you discover what's there. You do the dig. You do the archaeological work of discovering not only your voice and what it is that you are drawn to create, um, and that's like an ever evolving, beautiful journey. But also, you discover what it is that you need to say.
Yeah.
And I don't think we know that fully. I don't think we're capable of fully knowing that. We might have an idea. Like I
Yeah.
came to the work that I'm doing now with the idea of, the relationship between us and beauty and uh, florals and nature and this sort of these moments of transcendence that we have when we feel completely lost in nature. That was kind of the vague idea that I had, but it started as something completely different. And I had to explore that work. I had to do that work to get to the work
Yeah.
that I'm doing now. And they look aesthetically completely different from one another. But the way that I got here was through doing the work.
That.
And the way that that idea developed, the way that even this language I have around it now, that this idea of, um, you know, beauty and creativity as acts of brave rebellion against despair, that came from doing the paintings. I didn't come to the easel
Yeah.
and say, I have this idea, and it was really, I was going through some deeply challenging, traumatic things in my personal life. And I came, and this is the work that came out of me during that time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even until after, and this is why I love what you shared about creating what you created when you were grieving. I didn't know that I was grieving
Yeah.
in the work that I was doing until
Yeah.
after I did the work. And
Yeah.
now I look at the paintings that I did during that time that very similar to the work that I'm doing now. Um, and I can see it all over them. I look at them and I'm like, wow, that painting is holding space for a lot of grief and loss and wrestling with where I was going to find hope to keep going. I couldn't have told you that. I couldn't have told you that at the time, but now I can see it. But you have to do the work, and sometimes you just have to show up and do it and see where it takes you.
Yeah. And I think, particularly like you said, making the work specifically for people who've had grief, loss, or any kind of traumatic experiences that they are processing. I think my takeaway from the past 2 years was that for me, even though art is a way to process what I'm feeling, I realized that it also needed to be a place of hope. So even though when I was making something from a place of, I didn't know at that point that I was grieving, because I actually wanted to escape everything that I was feeling. And I was like, okay, this is one of the best way for me to do. But that when you're grieving or you're going through a hard time like this, it's very difficult to separate yourself from what you're feeling. It's very hard. I couldn't do it, at least. And I learned that if my work was only about the hardships and it wasn't giving me hope, or it wasn't giving me, today when I look at my work, so let's say when I started to make jewelry, so I started painting jewelry and Indian, a lot of those things that remind me of my mom, but in a positive way. And it doesn't make me break in tears, or it really excites me, and I'm like, I want to look at next piece of jewelry, trying to find connection and also building my own story. And even though I know that it has a purpose and that purpose is very personal to me, but it's also giving me a lot of joy, specifically in an area that is very sensitive. Like, it, for me, that became a necessity. I needed to feel excited, relieved, and good about something, and it needed to, like, I needed that. I couldn't take the pressure when it wouldn't bring that out. And making something that I just found beautiful was, of course, one one way. And that's how I started. I started painting the jewelry thing only because I love Indian jewelry. I love everything that is, our culture has to offer, the craft, all of that. But jewelry is one thing that I've always like, it's always stuck my mind. And I was like, you know what, let me just paint this, let me just draw this. And I would have like these random scribbles. And I was like, why would someone paint jewelry? Like the practical side of my mind or the purpose one, like just, jewelry doesn't have anything profound to say. There's no purpose. There's no this. Like, get this out of my way. This is what I want to do. And I found so much joy. And surprisingly, I have not received such an incredible response so far on any of the work that I did with this one. And it wasn't intentional, it wasn't anything. So sometimes I think, allowing ourselves to feel what we're feeling, and also chasing joy. I don't know. I mean, why do we feel guilty about it? At least I did. I felt like, oh, if I'm having too much fun, or if this feels easy, am I not
Mm,
pushing myself enough? Did you feel that way?
I don't know that it ever felt that way for me,
Okay.
because in my journey with painting, at least, um, I went to grad school. I got an MFA in a very traditional program. So it was a lot of disciplined work and effort and showing up there. It was a lot. So,
Absolutely.
and I was also during that time going through some really difficult things. I had a lot of personal losses. I had moved a lot. So I think in a similar way, I came to painting looking for joy.
Yeah, I
And
love that.
it also similarly surprised me in the way that it held space for the entire paradox of my
Yeah.
experience, the grief and the loss and the suffering and the discipline and the frustration and the joy and the hope and the longing and the desire for more, the hope for what was to come, the possibility of better, of
Yeah.
lightness, of beauty. It held space for all of it. And I think painting for me has always been that kind of paradox. Like it's held
Mm.
space
I
for the
love that.
whole spectrum.
That's very true.
And I think that creativity has such a unique ability to do that, which is why I love it so much. Because, like you said, you could come from that place of grief and you can do this work. And then it surprises you because it's like, oh, but also there's room for joy in it.
Yeah.
And it take away from the heaviness of the other things. You almost have both at once. You have heaviness and lightness within it.
Yes.
And I think because the creative process is so unique to the human experience, and it has this sort of mystery to it, and a sort of magic to it. I think you can't lie to your creative work. It because it's that sort of archaeological process, right? You're gonna dig up, like the creative work will dig up what's there. And so even if you come to a project with a particular intention, um, like the work that you're describing so beautifully, you came to it looking for something to bring you joy. You came to it
Yeah.
looking to be delighted, to delight in your work and to escape that pain. And yet it held space for your grief because that's
Yeah.
what was the surface.
Yeah.
And I think that the art just does that so beautifully. And
Yeah.
I love that we can't lie to our work.
Yeah.
I love that it will bring that up. Um, and it always surprises us.
I love that thought. This is wonderful. On that thought, I also want to ask you something, which is the second part. We've spoken quite extensively actually about our voice style, just like so much deeper than just on the surface. Something that I also found particularly interesting when I was speaking to you was, why, and I think I do feel that we have a lot of similarities. I think um, I do feel that there's something I can feel like a connection of how similar we are. But I also want to ask you, like, you have this incredible um, work that you share on your social media. You've built this extensive profile. And we've also spoken about there's so many things that you've done in the past and then landed here. So my question is, I know that everything that now that you tell me, like, okay, you were a photographer, now I can make sense, okay, why your imagery, not just your work, but how you document and share your work is so beautiful. Um, I want to ask you, like, how has these skills that you've learned over the years, on regular days, on other jobs, in life, helped you become a better artist? And what were one of the, do you think, like, the most top three, or like just most valuable skills that you felt like made helped you a lot?
It's a great question. I think probably the easiest way to answer that is photography, because it's such a direct
Yeah.
translation to painting. Um, and then obviously to social media and to documenting my work. But I think it also influenced the way I paint hugely, because the development of my voice as an artist, I think, started with photography. The way that I approach composition, value, lighting, all of that is hugely impacted by the work that I did as a photographer. And I did photography for about 7 years, actually. I
Wow.
started when I was still in high school. I did portraits of my friends, and I've always loved portraiture. That was always kind of my central focus. And that's now I paint portraits, I paint the figure. And so I think that in some ways it gave me a head start as I began painting, because the way that I had learned to see light, to compose an
Oh
image,
my goodness. Yes.
with
Yes.
frame, my eye for those things had already, I had spent years uncovering my voice, through a different medium. And so that certainly translated and influences how I paint. And what I paint. And then, of course, the practical side of it, I learned how to run a business. I learned how to
Yes.
work with clients and sell a service, build a website, and I was doing photography before Instagram, really dating
Yes.
myself
Yes.
here. But, so I didn't show up on social media in the same way, but I did learn how to become an entrepreneur, essentially. And that absolutely translates into being an
How
artist,
you reach
because
your
you're not
work.
just painting, you're running an art business.
Yes.
And that's part of it. It is that's the way of the world. You have to figure that out, if you want to dedicate more of your time to it. And so that those things certainly translated. I also think, and this one's a bit unique to my situation. So I, moved 12 times in the span of 11 years. My former partner went through a lot of job changes and
Okay.
moved around a lot, more than once a year on average.
Oh
So
God.
I was constantly starting over, and And because of that, I ended up sort of figuring out how to share my work as I began painting. I learned how to share my work in the ways that I could, which was predominantly online. And
Yeah.
so I found Instagram as this sort of safe haven of consistency when I was
Yeah.
going through all this loss and transition and constantly having to start over.
I think you moved so much. I think in the past 2 years, I'm a stable person. I know that now after years that I need stability in the sense of my patterns, and like I need to have some kind of structure to know, to have that space to create. Past two
Mhm.
years, I just didn't have it. And I was suffocating. I was suffocating so much because I didn't know how to be. I think I knew, now when I look back at it, I think I knew how to be creative no matter where I was. That never was a problem. But that was never also a parameter for me as a, if I'm doing well in my career or if I want to move forward or whatever. I have been creative in the past 2 years, definitely. But this desire of making work and, sharing work and, like you want to move forward in your career also, because if it was only like, I think this paradox of doing it for joy, but also doing it for, um, I'm not completely doing art for a living. I have so many other things that are happening around me, but also the desire that I want to excel at that as well. But I wasn't just having enough medium. And at that point, I think a sketchbook became my go to. That
Mhm.
wasn't before, because I was like, and like you said, Instagram has been something, even though I've been off every time. But just like, it would be that one thing because nobody was sitting on my head and be like, draw or like make something. But I was like, you know what? I need to share something. So
Exactly.
even if I was
It's a
able to
level
do
of
three,
accountability.
yes, yes. So even if I showed for 3 days, I wouldn't have showed up for either, but at least I did for three. That was, I mean, that was me. I'm holding myself accountable with something. Um, Even though that's another whole conversation of how risky that area can also be, because, but just also making these little actions.
Yeah. So I think that yeah brings this external accountability. And for me, it was where I found my people. And I still,
Yeah,
some of my best friends in the world now are people that I met through Instagram
Instagram.
um, years ago. This is,
Mm.
I started sharing my work on Instagram in 2017. And I think that's also something I like to talk about that because I think it's something a lot of people don't see. uh, Similar to with style, you just see the tip of the iceberg. You just see like
Right.
someone, you know, what you perceive as like this very successful social media profile, but you don't see the years of work that that person put
Yeah.
in behind it, or the way that they developed their voice.
And also numbers are not parameter of success. We all know that
Oh
by now. But again, a
no, they
buying
don't.
tricks us.
Yeah, they don't mean anything in terms of you
Yeah.
don't know what someone's
But
actual
it
practice is
satisfies
like.
our ego.
Yeah. And and I think the value in it for me in developing, like cultivating an audience or a community has been um, mostly as a space for those connections
Yeah.
because I didn't stay in one place. I didn't have a physical
Yeah.
in-person community where I could share my work and have that feedback. I'm a big believer that I don't think art can live its fullest life in a vacuum. Um, I think it's still valuable. Some people do their creative work for just for themselves, and that's beautiful. But for me, I feel like there's such a big part of the magic that happens when you get that feedback and someone gets to experience creative work and everything we've been discussing, all of the ways it holds space for our experience, that's translated in the work. That
Yeah.
stays in the work. And when someone engages it, that's what touches their soul and they get to encounter that. And I think that is such a beautiful you know, life of an artwork. Like that's such a beautiful expression of creative work. And that's one of my favorite parts about it is when I can create something and someone can engage with it and it resonates deeply in their soul in a similar way, or it touches their experience and we can share that and have that connection. I think that's so beautiful. And I
Yeah.
didn't have a space where that could happen in
Yeah.
person. I think a lot of
Right.
people can relate to with the pandemic because most of us, that was taken away from us during the
Yeah.
pandemic, even if we had it before. And so I love social media as much as it has its ups and downs and its challenges. And when you get the ego involved, it can get so messy and destructive. Absolutely. But also, it's such a beautiful opportunity for connection. And I think I committed really early on to show up pretty vulnerably. And
Yeah.
I told myself in 2017, I was like, okay, I'm going to post paintings on Instagram, even if I think they're terrible.
Yeah.
And I started doing that. And I still do that. I still share work that I'm like, I don't feel like this is my best, but I'm gonna just
I'm
put
going
it
to
out
put it
there.
out there.
That's part of its journey, and maybe it'll connect with someone. And that has just brought so much beauty into my life, not because of any sort of numbers or social media success, whatever that means, but because of the people I've met and the ways that we've connected. And I'm really grateful to the
I love
internet
that.
for that.
Oh my God. I think you have not only incredible work, but you have an incredible voice. But I just feel like you just have so many deep and wonderful things to say. And it truly, I think while I was going, just trying to do my groundwork, it wasn't just the art that you were making, but also the words that you were supporting it with, how you were sharing it, that really resonated with me. So thank you so much for the work that you do. It's truly wonderful.
Thank you so much for that.
Okay, I have a fun segment for you though. I have a quick rapid fire for us to have a little bit of fun and for people to learn a little bit more from you. So, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's start with this or that. Okay? Creativity or perfectionism? Which is more important to you?
uh, Creativity, because perfection can be crippling. And
Yes.
so I would say I lean into done is better than perfect. And for a while, my mantra was make bad art because I needed to get past I appreciate perfectionism, which is why I hesitated, because I do appreciate, I'm glad I'm a perfectionist because I think it's led me to become more excellent at what I do. It's led me
Yeah.
to improve what I do. But at the same time, you have to keep it on a tight leash.
Yeah.
Whereas creativity should be unleashed. And so, creativity.
Absolutely. Okay. Are you an early morning or a late night person? Your your preferred time, your time of creating. What's that?
So painfully both, because I really can get into a really good creative flow early morning or late at night, but there is no in between. Like I try to paint in the daytime, in the afternoon, and I am useless and terrible, and I think the world is awful, and I don't know what I'm doing. But get me like early morning or like late night, and
Hmm.
I'm like in the flow. So I have to
Yeah.
pick. Lately, it's been late nights because other things have interrupted my mornings. So I've leaned into that. But I think my ideal is early morning creativity. So when the sun comes up before the world is really moving, that's my favorite time to paint.
Music or silence? Which is your preferred mode of creating?
Always, I always blast music when I'm painting.
I love that. I think the best time for me in the studio is also I love moments of silence, but I love having something played, a book or a podcast in the back, and just immerse myself like I'm sitting with someone in a conversation and painting myself. Okay, what has been the biggest challenge that you think you've experienced in your creative path so far?
To keep going.
Yeah,
Time and time again, every time I come to the easel, every time I get out of bed, I have to decide, am I going to keep doing this work? Because it's hard. It's
yeah,
hard. It's self-directed. No one is, like you said, no
going
one's
to
sitting
yeah,
on my head telling me I have to do this. And it's vulnerable. You have to put yourself out there. It's a risk. And you have to always, over and over again, decide that you're going to take the leap and keep going.
yeah.
So yeah,
What's the best piece of advice you've heard so far?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is anything that Elizabeth Gilbert says. Her book Big
Oh my
Magic
God, I love
is
her.
my just I read
Yes.
it once or twice a year to keep
I
myself
do it twice in the beginning
oriented.
and the end of the year. I have to. It's like a ritual I can't give up on. It's
Yes.
like a talk I need to get through, to close in year, to begin in year. And probably I think I also listen to it as much as I wouldn't want to, like I feel like thrice a year. Because I'm sure, like I know there comes a point where I feel like too exhausted and tired. I need someone to give me that pep talk. And it is just that one book that can do that for me.
Yes, 100%. I adore her, and I love the way that she talks about creativity and this. I think the thing that has stuck with me, everything from Big Magic resonates for me and has stuck with me. But probably one of the most helpful ones is her concept of inspiration as something that exists,
Yes.
desires to be made, ideas
Yes.
want to be made, they want to come to life, and
I
you
love
get to
that.
choose to receive that invitation to partner with
Yeah.
them when inspiration strikes.
Yeah.
And that takes so much of the pressure off, and at the
Yeah.
same time makes it so much more transcendent and beautiful and magical to say yes.
Yes.
And so it sort of simultaneously makes it like it takes the pressure off and it makes it better. And I
Yeah.
just love that mindset because it completely transformed the way I see my creativity.
I love that. Okay. How has technology helped you or hindered you in your creative process?
Well, we talked about social media a bit already, so I think I'll leave that there. But I use technology in my process a lot because for my double exposure paintings, where I have the florals, I do paintings with florals overlaid on
Oh,
imagery of faces and figures. I use Photoshop to create those references and then I paint from the references. So creating digital references for my paintings is a hugely integral part of my process. And I really love that as a tool. So that's the way that it's helped. I think technology, though, the hardest part is the distraction. Limitless
I
possibility.
know.
Having, I'm so grateful for the internet, but also it's so much harder to focus on your work. And that's
Yeah.
real. So yeah,
Yes,
that's it.
absolutely. Okay. Last piece of question. What is that one piece of advice you would like to give for anyone who's who has creative aspirations, specifically women, and do not know where to begin with?
Begin with the work. Begin with committing to show up and create, whatever that looks like for you. So if it's a sketchbook or paintings or a daily study or you taking a class, there's so many different methods of doing this. But the point is to show up consistently. Doesn't have to be every single day. That's a lot of pressure. Take that off. If you want to do every day, good for you. But you don't have to. But consistently, over time, show up and do the work.
I love that advice.
I think that like 90% of people's problems and hangups around creativity will be solved there. Like so many of the struggles that newer artists come and bring to me, so many of the struggles I had when I was starting out are solved if you just keep painting. Just keep painting. Like finding your voice, finding your style, building your skill. What are you going to work on next? What is it that you're trying to say? How do you do this or that? Like you figure that out by doing the work. The answers are buried and you have to do the work to dig them up. And that comes with just showing up consistently over, and I'm talking years. Like, I don't mean for 30 days. I mean like for your life, for years. If you can show up and keep doing the work, it will not fail to reward you. I promise.
Oh my goodness, you have so many incredible things to say, and this podcast episode is, I think, packed with so much honesty, and I think it's a great episode for anyone who feels pressured, and I think a lot of us do. It does not matter on what stage of a career or life we are, but a lot of times we feel boxed with the opinions of what the gatekeepers or the society or the people around who, and we often look up for advice. I posted this reel on Instagram and on YouTube yesterday on my channels, that one thing, if I were to take away, is that from my journey so far, is that sometimes you have to believe in yourself the most than you believe in the version of what pop people look at you with, their interpretation of you. We oftentimes believe so much in that. And I think you've shared some incredible advices and your own experiences when it comes to how you approach your practice. Not just, I think all these conversations are not only valuable for someone who's just a painter, like, creative, but also in general. I think we're all, I truly believe that anything that we're doing is a practice. Like, I love yoga. Um, I love this, like what I'm doing. And for me, I know for me to get better at it, or I just need to keep showing up and getting, like, when I started the podcast, I was like, I don't know, what do I have to say or what I do. But the more I do it, the better I understand that why am I doing this. So anyone who's listening to this episode, I think our major takeaway would be on how we can keep the pressure off, make for the joy of making. And if you know anyone who can take value from this podcast episode, be an artist friend or, just your own communities, I think it could make a lot of difference, because I don't think these conversations are as open and as often as they should be. So thank you so much, Jess. Thank you so much for your honesty. Can you also let me know, where can people, anyone who's listening to this episode, how can they reach out to you, support you, if you have anything upcoming that you would want to share with us, and just anything? This is your floor.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me and for holding space for this conversation, because I agree. I think we need to bring this level of vulnerability and bring these conversations out more often. And I'm just so grateful to get to talk with you and really enjoyed it. I am working on releasing prints soon for the first time. So that's going to be coming up. people can find me. I obviously hang out on Instagram. That's where I do most of my sharing, community building. That's where I have these conversations on a regular basis and where I share my work. You can find me at Jess Currier or at jesscurrier.com. You can see my work and sign up for my newsletter if you want to hear about prints or any exhibitions coming up. But those are the big things.
For anyone, I mean everyone actually, um, this episode will be translated into a Q&A in an article format on Arts to Hearts project website. Not only that, I will ask Jess to send us the links to her newsletter and, to her prints, and also some exclusive shots and images that I'm sure Jess can share with us in spirit of giving you a little bit more insight. So anyone who is interested, make sure that even if you're hearing or viewing this podcast, I think it would be so amazing if you go visit our website and take a deep dive into what actually Jess looks like in a studio, how she's making, and support her work. So make sure you visit, make sure you tag me and Jess if you like this episode, share it with a friend who could truly value from it. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why I do this. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone who joined us today, and I can't wait to be back. And thank you, Jess. Thank you so much.
Thank you.